Hi everybody, I am Pascal Aurien, professor at Telecom Paris, France, une grande école. And the subject of my talk is new security paradigms for IoT, remote attestation dynamic path, and TLS 1.3 secure elements and a blockchain use case. And you see there a painting from Paul Sérusier, which is called the snake eaters. And this is a French expression which is to swallow snake, in French avaler des couleuvres. And so this expression means how can you believe things that are not credible? And so in this talk we try to tackle the following issue. How do you know that a thing is a thing you believe it is? That's to say, how can you trust hardware integrity and how can you trust software integrity? To illustrate this talk, two examples. One deals with Toyota Yaris, which is my car, and the other with Ledger Nano S, which is a cryptocurrency hardware wallet. And you see there you see this Toyota Yaris, and in modern car you have some computers named EQ, and EQ in fact are computers in charge of managing part of the car. And so in fact one question could be, how do you know that this computer are what about the integrity of software in this computer? And for Ledger Nano S, this is the same question. How do you know that the software running inside this token is the right software? So here is an example of hack. So in this Toyota, you have engine EQ, which is in charge of managing the engine. And so it is possible, as usual computer, it's possible to flash this computer, let's say to update the software. So in the CAN bus ISO standards, you have something called security access, and basically it's a challenge response protocol. And you see there an example of this protocol. So you have this on the onboard diagnostic side, which is associated to a plug. You request your EQ to send a seed, and you see there in red the seed value, which is 4187 B651. And afterwards, the client compute a response to this challenge according to a cryptographic algorithm. And it appears that it has been published that the secret key used is 0060600, that's to say simple key, and that the algorithm used is XOR, simply XOR. So it's mean 41 E7 D6 51 is simply the XOR value with the security key of the challenge. And knowing this key, you can start the process of reflashing the engine EQ. So it's not very difficult to do that. And the second illustration is of the same thing, is dealing with Tesla car. So in 2016, a reverse engineering was done on the update of the Tesla car. And the researcher finds that effectively, using the same ISO procedures, the controller has the EQ to send a seed, and this seed there is 60 bin wide. And then the controllers, using a cryptographic algorithm, compute a response. And it appears that the response there is quite simple, because the key is 35, and the algorithm is simply the XOR of this value with all the seed bytes. So it's mean, again, it's very simple to start reflashing procedures in some cars, and therefore to modify the content of the firmware. The second example is the Ledger Nano S, and so this is a blockchain wallet. That's to say, it is a device dedicated to store cryptocurrency and to generate a transaction. And so you see the structure of this device. You have a MCU, that's to say the STM32. It's a processor. And you have a secure elements. The kind of secure element is the smart cards, but not in the form factor of a smart card, but with the same hardware. And the issue when you are using a secure element is to be sure that the software that use this secure element is safe. And so in order to check the software integrity of this MCU, Ledger use a kind of local attestation procedures. That's to say, a handler sends memory content to the secure element. The secure element hash this content, and finally check this content to reference. And if it's okay, then the secure element is unlocked. It means that in that case, the memory content acts as a kind of pin code. And this is what did hackers, Thomas Root, a few years ago in 2018. So it just using a bug in the software called the food baby bug. That's a food babe was an hexadecimal information, so it's 16-bit information, 32, sorry, that indicates that the bootloader is locked. And the issue was that this memory cell has two addresses. It's very common in hardware that the same memory cell has several addresses. And so Thomas Root simply used another address in order to erase this information and to unlock the bootloader. So the result of that was that it's possible to download a snake game in the device. So obviously, if you modify the software of the MCU that deals with the secure elements, then you are going to have a big trouble about the integrity of your object. So our use case with the startup Ethertrust, we design what is called crypto terminals. And the idea of the crypto terminals is to sign a transaction for blockchain in a trusted place. So the heart of the security is like in Ledger, it's a smart card. And to be sure about the integrity of the processor is dealing with this smart cards, we use a bare metal architectures. What means that it's possible to fully erase the flash memory associated to the MCU, and by doing so, it means you know that the software is the right one because you have the control of the download of the software. So that was the main idea of this architectures. But the next issue then came from the programmer. If you want to flash the content of the MCU, you need a programmer, and this programmer, in fact, is a small token that also embed the MCU, and that also need firmware. So the next issue will be, how do you know that the firmware running in the programmer is the right firmware? So, in fact, we want to have some trust insurance about the programmer firmware. And so to reach this goal, we developed something called, it's a kind of remote attestation algorithm, and it's called time-stamped bijective MAC algorithm, in short BMAX. And the second things we will want to have is trust insurance about the programmer chip itself. And for that, we introduce an innovative dynamic puff technology. This is an example of SPI programmer that it's an open hardware developed by Thomas Fish in 2011, and it's called USB ASP. And you see that it's open hardware, so you have the schematic, and it's open software. It means you have also, the firmware. So the issue we have now that this programmer need a firmware. So a programmer needs a programmer, and so it means it's a recursive use, and it's a kind of chicken and eggs program. We need the firmware requires the programmer to be downloaded, and the programmer requires a firmware. So it's a kind of infinite loop. An interesting project was called the Ouroboros project, which is a kind of Ouroboros is a snake that's bit its tail, and in this project, Jonathan Thompson introduced a bootloader for the USB ASP device. The interest of this bootloader is that the bootloader, from a software point of view, is acting like a programmer. That's to say, you can, with the same USB driver, use this bootloader to program the token. So it means it's possible to modify the firmware of this token. And so the next step now is to try to prove the integrity of the bootloader. So let's introduce remote attestation algorithm, the time-stamped BMAC. It relies on two principles. The memory is finite, and the computing time cannot be modified. So the idea of the bijective MAC is to compute a fingerprint of a set of memory M, such as flash, SRAM, square prom, according to a pseudo-random order fixed by a permutation P. So the hash is computing in a pseudo-random way. We use hash functions such as SHA-2 or SHA-3, and we remark that given a set of memory M, factorial M permutation are available. So even for 35 bytes, factorial 35 is greater than 2 power 188. So BMAC proves the knowledge of memory contents. There we use a definition used by the ICR algorithm, previously introduced by the papers below. And this algorithm was using a checksum performed in a pseudo-random way according to a permutation over a set of memory. So BMAC is a process whereby a trusted entity, the verifiers, measures internal state of an untrusted possible compromise device, the prover. The BMAC verification function is a self-check hash code. That's to say a sequence of instructions that compute a fingerprint over themselves in a way that the max will be wrong or the computation will be slower if the sequence of instruction is modified. So there you see some attack and countermeasure used by the BMAC, by the time-stamped BMAC. First, BMAC fills all unused memory, flash, SRAM, square PROM, by pseudo-random contents. And second, the BMAC time-stamped is the XOR between the BMAC result and the computing time. So you see in the middle the BMAC algorithm working with honest memory and with all unused memory in which all the unused memory are filled by pseudo-random contents. On the left, you see an attack when you have some free memory in the system, in which you have a corrupted BMAC, and this corrupted BMAC simply use this memory copy in order to compute the right results. And on the right, you see another attack in which a compression algorithm is used in order to retrieve the right content of the memory. But we think that when you use a compression algorithm, decompression algorithm, this induces a modification of the computing time. So the measure of the computing time should detect this decompression algorithm. And there you see two use cases for BMAC. On the left, you see the integrity probe, in which, in fact, it's it's a use case for our programmer. It means you have a bootloader, and the software that is downloaded by the bootloader is only the BMAC itself, and the other part of memory is filled with pseudo-random data. On the right, you see software prover. The difference there is that you have a bootloader that downloads code. In this code, you have a BMAC, but you have other code than BMAC. And in that case, also the unused memory is filled with pseudo-random data. And in the center, you see that well, when you are using a program, usually the bottom of the memory is filled by data, and then the top of the bottom is filled by stack, and then afterwards you have the heap, and you have some part of SRAM memory is not used at computing time, and this memory is we fill this memory by pseudo-random data. Obviously, you cannot not fill in the real world all the SRAM memory by pseudo-random data, because it will imply that you destroy the data used by your software. And now, two words about the minimum code size heuristic. The idea is that by construction, given a set of functionality, a program has a minimum code size, and this is true because the code has a finite non-zero size. So because the code has a size and this size is not infinite, so there is a minimum code size, but it's from formal point of view, it's difficult to define what is a minimum code size. And we assume that if you merge two MCS program, P1 and P2, in a P3 program, then it means that the size of P1 union P2 is greater than the maximum of size P1 or size P2. And the idea is that if you modify the bootloader, and if the bootloader is MCS, then the size of the bootloader will increase. And if the BMAC is also LCS, then the modified bootloader could not store the code of the BMAC in the flash memory. So now the next step is the permutation choice. So we choose to use exponential permutation, which are based on a generator in Z/PZ star with P prime, P being greater than the memory size. And other publication introduce permutation in Z/PZ. Here we have an example of three kinds of permutation used by previous works. So let's talk about BMAC permutation and computing time. So we choose the function G2 power S1 multiplied by G1 power X in modulus P as a permutation. And if you take, when you compute, if you take a look at the G1 terms, it's G1 is used, you compute G1 power X in the software by the multiplication by G1 by the previous result. So it means the first permutation acts like a kind of fuzzing for the index, because obviously in X increase from 0 to n by increment of 1. And S1 is a multiplicative term that is very easy to compute. And the multiplication by S1 gives more entropy to the permutation. And G2 is computed according to a square and multiply algorithm. We note it SNIM algorithm. And this algorithm, which is a very classical algorithm, relies on upon the decomposition of X in base 2, and it's mean doing that by using the square and multiply algorithm. You introduce the computing time, which is dependent upon the number of 1, of bit 1, in the number X, and this naturally induce a distribution which imply some standard deviation in the computing time. And another thing that we use P is a Sophie German prime. That's to say P is equal to 2Q plus 1 with Q prime, and P equals 7 modulo 8. And from that, it's easy to have an analytical form of the generator. So the generator is expressed as P minus 2 power K modulo P with a key in the range 1 Q-1. And there you see an implementation of the BMAC for the ATmega8 processor. The ATmega8 processor is a processor used by the programmer, and this processor has a 8 kilobyte flash, 2 kilobyte for the bootloader, 1 kilobyte SRAM, and Square PROM half kilobyte. And you see that this code is simple. We choose P Sophie Germain prime, and we use for exponentiation. So the exponentiation use a number of 14-bit. And as you see, this code is simple. And you see in grid, first you see the multiplication for computing G1 power X. And so in grid, you see the square and multiply algorithm used in order to compute the exponential. And we use a timer. This timer has a 64 cycle resolution given a clock at 12 megahertz. So there you see an illustration of the computing time. So you see two things. You see the entropy of computing time introduced by the square and multiply algorithm. And obviously, you see sometimes you see also the entropy introduced by the computing of the hash function. And there is a result that shows you the distribution of the computing time for the BMAC. So here we perform about 4,000 measurements, and we see that we have an average computing time of about 9 seconds and standard deviation of about 4 milliseconds. So this means we have some things like 12-bit of entropy for the computing time. There you see an illustration of an attack in which we stop and restart the timer used by the BMAC algorithm. And because you use a subclock, that's to say the clock divided by 64, what happens if you start and if you stop the clock and restart the clock? It happens that you introduce a random error with some distribution, and it means it's not possible to modify the code without modifying the computing time with some random error. And finally, this is an illustration of the integrity probe for the ISP programmer. So using the Ouroboros paradigm, we have this programmer that uses a bootloader, and we download in the programmer first an integrity probe that computes the BMAC algorithm, the time-stamped BMAC, and the result can be displayed by two LED. That's a display part of the XOR operation between the MAC code and the computing time, or you can display the result using serial links, and so you can see the result of the algorithm. And so the difference between classical approaches is the classical approach. The loaded application press the bootloader. That's to say, there is no way to know if the bootloader is correct or not. A simple attack is to not download the code in the device, for example, and so to let the malware and modify. So in classical system, the application trusts the bootloader. For example, in secure boot, you have to trust the first piece of code, which is the bootloader. And in our approach, the integrity probe check the bootloader. So you have a proof that the bootloader that download you is correct. And the second illustration is a software prover. We use this for the crypto terminals. You see that. So we have there 256 kilobyte flash, 8 kilobytes SRAM, and 4 kilobytes Square PROM. And so you can start BMAC calculation using seed, which is entered by the user. And after about 320 seconds, that's to say about 5 minutes, you get a result. And this result gives you the BMAC value, the computing time, and the XOR value of this part of the lower byte of the BMAC, less significant byte of the BMAC, and you get this kind of security code, which is that prove the integrity of your software. So now we are going to introduce SRAM puff and flipping bits. So SRAM memory is made with 6 CMOS transistors and includes 2 inverters, I1 and I2, connected in series, that's to say head to tail. Due to transistor physical and electrical dissymmetry, some memory cells take a fixed value, let's say a non-random value, after powering up. This effect, called SRAM puff, may be used for microcontrollers unit authentication purposes. So how to mix BMAC and SRAM puff? The idea is to introduce SRAM puff in the BMAC algorithm. So we don't fill all the SRAM unused memory with pseudo-random data, but we keep some SRAM puff cells unchanged. Here you see the ATmega 8 chip die on the left, and you see the SRAM. So, and with the puff effect in the SRAM, prove that you are using the right chip in your programmer. To extract the SRAM puff, we use a SRAM probe. It's a firmware which is downloaded in the ATmega 8. And an important thing that it has been demonstrated in previous works that SRAM puff are dependent from the voltage rising, and more generally for the powering up signals. So here is an illustration of our puff extractor, the device. It's designed around an Arduino. So you see there the device under test. That's to say the programmer. So we have the bootloader, and thanks to the bootloader, we download the SRAM probe in the ATmega 8. The powering up of the device is monitored thanks to a digital to analog converter that generates slopes or isosignals. So first we power up the device under test, and then thanks to serial links, we extract the SRAM content. We read the extract content. So here I have some notation. For n measure, we perform a device key. We note in MNT the I, the number of one occurrence for memory cell I. And we call domain the set of cells that are always seen at 1 or always seen at 0, as the cells are referred as noisy. So for 2 devices and 2 sets of measures, we call common domain the intersection of the 2 device domain. That's to say, the cell that keep a fixed value, either 1 or 0. And we call flipping bits the cell that belongs to the common domain, but which have not the same value, either 1 or 0. We use the following graphical convention. Cells always seen at 1 are colored in green. Cells always seen at 0 are colored in yellow. Cells either seen at 1 or 0 are colored in white, noisy cells, and flipping bits are colored in red. So there is a result of a measure for 250 samples. You see that the number of cells for about 5,000 bits. You see that the number of cells always seen as 0 is close to 2,600 on the left. The cells always seen at 1 are about 2,100. And so the puff bits are about cover about 93% of the memory cells. So only 7% of SRAM cells are not puff bits. And you see also the evolution of the puff domain that remains quite stable up to 50,000 measures. Here you see a graphical representation for two devices. So you have on the left the device 1 for 250 measures. So cells always seen at 1 are colored in green, always seen at 0 are colored in yellow, and noisy cells are colored in white. And you see the same graphical representation on the right for device 2. And in the middle two, you see flipping bits colored in green, in red, sorry, and the common domain either colored in green or yellow, and noisy bits in white. And this is an illustration, graphical representation that show you that the two devices are different. So here is the static authentication. On the left, on the right, you see reference measures for the device 1 with 250 measures. On the right, reference measures for device 2 with 250 measures. And in the middle, a device with only one measure, so no noisy bit, because there is no noisy bit cannot be identified for single measures. And this is an example of graphical authentication. So on the left, you see that there are no flipping bits. That's the comparison of device 1 with the reference measure for device 1. And on the right, you see a lot of flipping bits, approximately 50%, created by using the reference for device 2. So here's this simple authentication algorithm. You using puff. We note the probability of memory cells to be either 1 or 0 p, with p equal to 1 minus epsilon. Epsilon is a small value. Typically, we use epsilon is equal to 10 power minus 3. So we consider two measures. One N1 is a reference, typically 250 samples, and N2 is a single try. And we consider that we authentify the right device if the number of flipping bits is less than epsilon multiplied by the number of cells in the domain of the sample one. Here's a graphical representation of the number of observed flipped bits according to the rising times. So flipped bits are puff bits, that's to say memory cells with a fixed content are the one of 0, but this content is dependent of the powering up rising time. And this effect is induced by the CMOS capacitance dissymmetries. So for fast rising times, there are about 400 flipping bits, and these numbers decrease to 0 for a rising time less than 128 milliseconds. So here is a graphical representation of flipping bit for this device. The flipped bits are colored in red, and other members of the domain are colored in yellow and green. And so this is a card of identity card for the device. Regarding PUF and BMAC, PUF bits may be included in the BMAC calculation. So it's possible to bind the BMAC to the processor physical identity. And it's also possible to include flipped bit in the BMAC calculation. So it means it's possible to define a dynamic BMAC. So this is an illustration. This is the SRAM dump, and of UUC. This is a SRAM dump for 2 rising time of the powering up signals. And you see that fixed puff bit and more than that fixed puff byte are circle. So if you include these cells in the BMAC calculation, the BMAC algorithm will be bound to the physical device, and the flipped bit and more than that flipped byte are colored in red. So it means you see there are difference on the left part and on the right part. It means that if you include these memory cells in the BMAC calculation, the result will be dependent on the powering up rise time. So now we are going to introduce the dynamic perf. So let's introduce SY waveforms. The idea of SY waveform is to mix 2 slope, S1 and S0, that induce flipped bits. So we use S1 slope that creates that should create a puff bit with a value B1 key until the U value where we switch to slope S0, we should create a puff bit B0 key. Obviously, B1 key is equal to 1 minus B0 key. So for U value equal to 0, we get the slope S0, and so we have the slope S0, and so we should get B0 key bits, and for U equal to 1, that's to say for the slope S1, we should get B1 key equal to 1 minus B0 key. Therefore, it should exist a threshold value, a threshold voltage, Vs, for which the bit value change. And to observe this, we perform 25 measures for U parameter ranging for 0 to 250 with a resolution of 4096. We observe obviously that the switching regions, that's to say The region in which the number of value of one value, for example, decrease to 25 to 0 is noisy, and we note that the threshold average is about 100. Here is a distribution for 400 flipping bits. So we observe that this threshold value is small, in average about 200 millivolts. And this leads us to define the Rx power up waveform, which is made of two parts. First, for low voltage, let's say less than 500 millivolts, we have a slope, and then we have a fast rising time. So the idea behind Rx power up waveforms is that these waveforms create flipping bit at low voltage. So the software doesn't know the Rx waveforms used for power-ups simply because it doesn't work for low voltage, for example, less than 500 millivolts. So this is a graphical illustration of flipped bit induced by the Rx waveform. So here you see the comparison. You see the SRAM puff created by the R waveform with a slope of 64 milliseconds compared to a reference with a slope of 64 milliseconds. And the red points show the errors, that to say the flipping bit, and you can see there are quite no errors. And here you see the same graphic, but with a reference at 1024 millisecond slope, and you see that in fact the error color in red are the flipping bits. And here it's the same things with the air signals using 1000 millisecond slope compared to a slope reference of 64 milliseconds. So you see the red point as the error. In fact, this error are the flipping bit. And here you see the comparison with a reference 1000 milliseconds, and then you see that quite no errors occurs. For finally, we propose the following dynamic puff authentication protocol. Luke has SRAM content for two Rx power up waveforms, I64 and I1024. The I64 SRAM content has about 200 flipping bits. These content are determined at low voltage, let's say 512 millivolts, before Lux and Vador have a digital life. So Vador and Leia know these SRAM contents. In order to authenticate Luke, Leia used power up waveform, either I64 or R1024, in a random order. Lux will always produce the right responses, while Vador will make a random choice. So after n tries, the probability of zero error for Vadors will be less than 1/2 power n. Finally, I will conclude this talk by the introduction of TLS 1.3 nano servers. So 2 words about what is called the TLS ICE, that's to say TLS for secure element. So the idea is to implement TLS 1.3 server in a secure element, that's to say a smart card. And the security profile we use is the pusher key. Pusher key has about 32 bytes. And so the interest of running TLS 1.3 server in a smart card with PSK, with pusher key, is that the pusher key, in fact, acts as a pin code for the networks. So in this kind of device, so this device is described by public IETF draft. referred below. And the idea is to provide only two 7816 commands. And these commands are used to receive TLS packets and to send TLS packets. The interface with the TCP/IP network is simple. What is needed is a device, typically a Wi-Fi or Ethernet device, or device with TCP/IP connectivity. And this device is connected to internet, and so this device receive TLS packet. These packets are pushed in the TLS SI elements, and this element process a TLS server state machine and produce TLS packets. So in fact, the TCP/IP node is just a relay that send and receive TLS packet to the secure element. So when the TLS channel is open, then it means that an application is running in this secure element. And in a use case under development, this application is a key tools, it's a key box, and is used to generate key and to sign, to produce signatures typically used for blockchain transactions. That's why we call that a blockchain use case. So here's an illustration of the implementation of this concept. So on the right, you see this smart card, which is a Java card, which has the same form factors. And inside this Java card, there is a software, and this software is an implementation of TLS SE and run TLS 1.3 server using pusher key. And this secure element is running a blockchain application, that's to say, an application that is used to generate key, to securely store this key, and to generate signatures, to compute signatures needed by transaction. This smart card is driven by a microcontroller unit. It's a very small MCU, and in this MCU we implement the BMAC algorithm in order to prove the software integrity, and also the dynamic puff. The idea is that what you want is it's a kind of smart card reader for networks, but the software integrity of this smart card reader is proved by the BMAC algorithm, and the authenticity of the chip is also proved by the dynamic puff algorithm. So thanks to this MCU, a serial link is available with an internet board. In that case, it's an ISP8266 chip. This chip costs about $1, and these chips delivers TCP/IP connectivity without any insurance of integrity or trust and whatever. And so this is an illustration of the deployment of a security module for internet. And this is the end of my talk, and I am ready to answer to your question. Thank you for your attention.